How would climate change affect future supply of timber is a question of strategic importance to wood industry. No one knows for sure how timber supply in the future would change. One reason is that climate change, to what extent itself, and the risk of extreme weather due to climate change, they are uncertain. Another reason is that the climate change affects timber production in different directions. My name is Peichen Gong. I have been working with this climate mitigation policy targeted at forestry in Sweden for in the recent years. I'm going to discuss some of the main effects of climate change on timber production. People have different perceptions of climate change, but I think that some knowledge or understanding of these different effects of climate change on forestry and forest management, timber production, they are important for developing rational expectations about supply of raw material to wood industry in the future. Very roughly, we could think that climate change affects timber supply in two ways. One is the direct effects. Climate change affects the rate of forest growth, and climate change could increase damages to forests and increase the quantity or rate of nature mortality. In the long term and at larger geographic scale, it is this growth, net growth, that growth net of this mortality, which determines the sustainable supply of timber. Major effects of climate change on timber supply is actually through these so-called indirect effects. And we could talk about two types of indirect effects. One is this adaptation to climate change. Forest managers would change their management activity in response to the anticipated climate change. The other is the climate change mitigation. This is a policy-driven effect. There are regional or national or larger scale policy measures to increase forest carbon sequestration, and this policy would have could have significant effect on timber production. Think about this effect of climate change on forest growth. One of the reason of climate change is due to increasing concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and the main type of greenhouse gases is carbon dioxide. Tree growth needs carbon dioxide. When the concentration of CO2 increases, it has a positive effect on tree growth. This is something called, sometimes we call the CO2 fertilization. Climate change means higher temperature in different places. Higher temperature, the effect on growth, they are they vary. There are great spatial variation in the effect of temperature increase on tree growth. In warmer, drier regions, the increase of temperature would increase the risk of drought, and drought stress makes trees more vulnerable to disease, to these pest attacks, and so on. It also would also reduce the growth of forest. On the other hand, in regions where the temperature is relatively low, an increase in temperature would mean longer growth period, growth season, and faster growth rate. The effect of climate change in terms of precipitation is also varying. Some areas it increases, some areas it decreases. The increase, of course, the decrease in this rainfall would cause this damage. The effect of climate change, combining these three aspects, the total effect of climate change on forest growth varies from place to place. In some regions, the growth would increase. A simulation by the Swedish Forest Agency, they normally make a so-called consequence analysis with fixed intervals. This simulation shows that in the coming 100 years, the growth of the forest growth in Sweden would increase by 20% due to warmer, the climate change, the weather, the temperature is higher, and precipitation is increasing. This scenario shows, this is the scenario, climate scenario, RCP 4.5. The growth, of course, the light green part of this figure shows the increase in growth due to the increasing growing stock of timber. There are more timber to grow, so the growth would be higher. But the dark green area is completely due to the climate change. I think in this boreal forest region where forests are managed, they would have a similar pattern. The growth would increase. In these warmer, drier places, the growth would decrease due to climate change. This figure shows some of these simulated growth of trees in terms of something called annual rain width index. We don't have to care about what this measures. It only shows that a higher value of this index means faster growth of the trees. The simulations, there is a clear trend that in southwest of the US, where it is very dry, very warm, the growth would decrease. Of course, this is an extreme climate scenario, is unlikely to happen, but on the other hand, it clearly shows that climate change would lead to reduced growth in forests in some regions. And there are a lot of study about this increase in forest damage connected to climate change. In this figure shows that the numbers are actually the references, the article, the number of articles which were referred to. They does not mean how many occurrence of this damage has occurred. This figure shows that in Central South America, especially in this west part of the US, there has been a lot of observed, documented forest mortality death due to drought. The direct reason could be disease outbreak or insect outbreak. In this upper picture shows the mortality in Albert of aspen trees, and the lower picture shows the death of ponderosa pine in New Mexico in the US. Similar observations has been documented in Europe, not much in the northern Europe, is mainly in the southern part. There are, for example, in Spain, this Scots pine has large area of Scots pine was damaged because of the bark beetle, and they were due to the drought stress. The vigor of the trees becomes lower. They become more vulnerable, and makes it easier for this outbreak, and large amount of trees died. In Switzerland, the little reddish colored parts, they are the Scots pine, which died due to this also bark beetle attack. And this is also related to, attributed to the climate change or drought. That disease pests, they would increase the mortality of trees, make a large amount of trees die. There are these extreme weather conditions associated with the climate change, and that could cause large-scale destruction of forests. We saw a lot of news about this large scale wildfires in Amazon, in Australia, in the US, and so on. There has been some estimation about the area of forest to be which is expected to be burned by fire in the coming in the rest of the century, depending on climate change. If the climate change policy is successful at the global level, the climate change, the temperature could be controlled under 2 degrees, that the fire risk would increase by 30 to 50% compared to today's level in this long term by the end of the century. This, of course, has a negative effect on the amount of forest available for timber production, and it will has a negative effect on the supply of raw materials. However, the effects of increased risk of mortality or of this forest destruction by fire or by these storms, they could be, the effect could be reduced by this adaptive changing forestry practices. By changing tree species, for example, by changing the silviculture system. Another important aspect here is that the drought risk increase in areas the areas with the increased risk of drought is not necessarily the same as the major regions where timber are produced. So these effects would affect the supply of timber. I could take one example that in Europe, it is European Union's forest strategy. They promote the adoption of so-called continuous cover forestry. And if we change large-scale change to adoption of this continuous cover forestry would probably leads to lower production, total production of timber, but on the other hand, would increase the share of the large diameter trees. Because in this kind of system, we go into the forest every 5 or 10 or 20 years and cut the large trees, make space for smaller trees to grow up. On the other hand, we don't know how the continuous cover forestry would expand in the Nordic countries. Another adaptive measure is to increase the share of mixed species forests. To increase the share of broadleaf trees like birch or in this softwood, in this coniferous forests. That would also affect of course, the growth, the total supply, and the spacious composition of timber. Regarding the indirect effect, the policy-driven effect is there are strong, at least in Europe, there are strong movement to increase the net uptake of carbon dioxide in the LULUCF, land use change, and the forestry sector. And of course, the major increase is expected to take place in forestry. To increase forestry sequestration of carbon dioxide, one need to change the management. Some of the main measures include afforestation, planting forest on some of the agricultural land formerly, reforestation and forest restoration. These activities would at least not have, would most likely have positive effect on the supply of, on the production of timber. At least they would not have any negative effect. Another measure is category of measures are these so-called improved forest management. This could be very different activities like fertilization, increasing forest rotation age, and so on. These effects would to increase carbon sequestration in forest requires more forest and forest growing faster. This would have a positive effect on timber production in the long run. But there is one thing which is not quite certain. That is, some people argue that one should preserve forest to store carbon for longer time period. If we set aside forest for the purpose of carbon sequestration, then it would definitely cause reduced supply of timber. We have less forest to be managed for timber production. Of course, the growth is, the supply is affected by many other factors. One is the increasing competition for timber and other forest biomass driven by this wish to develop bioeconomy and to reduce the emission of greenhouse gases. Another factor is the area of the forest land which is managed for timber production. This could also change. And the third is factor is which has a great potential effect is the tree breeding and which would increase the productivity of forest land. I would like to show a last picture about the total forest area which is managed for timber production. In Europe is about 50%. It changes is about 50% of the forest are managed for timber production. The others are either for nature conservation or social value or multiple purposes. But at the global level, only about 30% of the forest are managed for timber production. So the bottom line is that we would need, the society would need to use more wood products, and to produce wood products, one need to produce more timber. So if climate change is causing the significant decrease of growth in forest, there probably would be more forest to be used to produce timber. This is my presentation. I hope that it would give you some idea about the different effects of climate change on timber supply. I wish you a successful event.